Welcome back to my studio. Today we'll be finishing up my fall table runner quilt pattern, and it will be all ready for the holidays. In our last video, we finished embroidering and piecing the top for our table runner, so now it's time to turn to the quilting. Before I do, I want to talk a bit about batting for this project. Because it's a table runner that might have relatively hot dishes placed on it, I recommend using a pure cotton batting, like this Quilter's Dream. It has really good insulating properties, and I found it really pleasant to work with. You'll need at least twin size batting for this because of the length of the runner, and I recommend using at least the select loft of thickness. If you use a thinner batting, you may want 2 layers, or 1 layer of regular batting plus one designed for heat insulation. Insul Bright is a popular brand for quilting potholders, but I haven't used it myself, so I can't comment on how well it quilts. With that, let's get started. Off camera, I sandwiched the quilt using the same process I've used in the past, spraying the batting layers lightly with Sulky KK2000 temporary adhesive to keep them together while I stitch some basting stitches. For the basting stitches, I'm essentially stitching a box around each section. The stitch is the same long standard 1/2-inch basting stitch my Q20 has that I've used on other projects, with the stitch regulator set to BSR 3. One tip worth mentioning again, though, is that you want to use a free motion foot with a closed ring. The stitch is so long that it can sometimes catch on an open ring foot and give you problems. Let's start with the center section of the quilt. I'm set up for free motion quilting on my Bernina Q20 with my stitch regulator set at BSR 1 and 12 stitches per inch. I have the idle speed or cruise speed set for 200 for now. I'm using the brown 40-weight polyester I used earlier to stitch a small stipple pattern in between the central embroidery. This may be hard to see. The whole point is to make this disappear. You want a balance between pushing the fabric back a little to let the embroidery stand out and letting the batting puff up enough so the table runner gives the table good insulation from hot dishes. The trickiest part is getting the stitches from section to section through the narrow channels between the embroidery. Just work through it slowly and carefully. You shouldn't have any problem. I'm not going to try highly decorative stitching in the center section. The dark tones and heavy pattern of the brown batik is perfect for fall, but it wouldn't really let decorative quilting stand out much. If it did, it might detract from the applique or embroidery too. Before I stitch in this next area, I'm just going to stitch in the ditch around the appliqued wreath of leaves to let it puff out some more. Then it's more stippling between the embroidery and the leaves, and between the leaves and the corners, though maybe not as small. using a ruler to help me stitch a really straight line along the ditch between the border and center panel of this midsection, just to start off. It needs to be really accurate because I'm using a light tan thread that matches the background. If I accidentally stitch over the black border, it will be obvious. For the main part of the panel, I'm using an echo stitch around the branches and leaves. This section was inspired by Japanese art and trees in the fall, and the echoes on the tan fabric remind me of a Japanese rock garden. For the borders, I'm stitching some ruler work with a repeated circle pattern to give a little variety and complement the echo theme of the main panel. The trick is in selecting the right size of circle. I'm using some rulers from Lisa Kaye for this, and I've added some dots to the bottom of them so they don't slip on the fabric. Our charcoal gray thread here contrasts just enough with the darker border to let you see the stitching without distracting your attention from the main design. The end sections are where you get the most artistic with the quilting because the light background fabric shows off your stitching even with relatively little contrast. Fall and falling leaves always make me think of wind and blustery days, so I chose a swirling pattern that reminded me of air blowing around. I think it's a great compliment to the leaves. For the borders, I'm stitching kind of a wavy pattern freehand. I started doing this with rulers, but the pattern I have isn't quite the right scale, and it's tricky to work it around the embroidery. In the end, the waves worked really well. For the binding on this project, I want to demonstrate an alternative for cutting the binding strips to the traditional method of rulers and a rotary cutter. Both methods work well, this just gives you another option. I have here my AccuQuilt Go and my 2 1/4 inch strip die. This die is very large and will cut 4 strips of layers at a time. You need to prepare the fabric like you would if you were cutting strips with a rotary cutter. Fold it and align the edges carefully, and if you want, press the folds so they stay straight. Place it so that all the edges will get cut, and put the plastic cutting mat on top that pushes against the die. Crank it through the AccuQuilt Go, making sure that it is cutting through everywhere. You can see I got nice, long, straight strips. These are crosswise cuts that I prefer for binding. It's stretchier than lengthwise. This is plenty for this project, so we're finished cutting the binding. Trim the quilt square to its final dimensions. Don't forget to take out any basting stitches that might get caught under the binding. Fold and prepare the binding strip like normal and stitch it down with a 1/4 inch seam allowance. At the corner, fold it out at a 45-degree angle and finger press the seam. Fold it back again with just a tiny amount extra to give room for the binding fabric and align it square with the next edge. You may want to pin it here to keep it in place. Stitch down the next edge and continue. With the binding stitched to the edge, fold it over and prepare to stitch the other side. I like to hold it in place with a series of clips. For this, I'm doing a machine stitch binding using a decorative stitch that I know will catch all the different pieces of fabric to keep the binding secured down well. And with that, our quilt is complete and ready to be cleaned up and used. I hope you enjoyed this project. If you missed the first 2 parts of it, I'll leave a link at the end to the earlier videos so you can see how we started. There's also a link to my website where you can purchase the pattern you saw used here today, including the embroidery designs, shape files for cutting the appliques with a digital cutter, and a complete illustrated instruction guide. The embroidery designs and leaf cutouts may be useful resources to have on hand for your own quilts in the future. Speaking of the future, the most important thing you can do to help support making more content for this channel is to subscribe. Subscribing is free, lets you know when I put out new content, and helps you find all my projects and tips for easy references. As always, if you have any questions or comments, please post them below, and I'll get back to you as soon as possible. With that, let me just wish you a happy Thanksgiving, and until next time, have fun in your studios.